With Disney's announcement that there will be a live-action adaptation of 1989's The Little Mermaid, as the next wave of the plague of live-action remakes from the Disney's classic animation vault, there has been a lot of noise in the media about who will be in the film and what it may be like. However, the subsequent reveal that actress Halle Bailey will be playing the role of Ariel has created a lot of negative attention. Tweeters and commenters have lamented over the fact that she's African American, while the 1989 version of the character was white, that she's not a redhead. Of course, if they can give her a tail to swim with, I'm sure that they can dye her hair red. And that her casting will mean that this next Little Mermaid film will not be Danish enough. That is Danish as in Hans Christian Andersen, the author of the original Little Mermaid story. The controversy that this race-bent casting has created could be separated into two different categories. One belief is that the new trend in casting will make this new movie unlike the original. And fair enough, it will be different. Just like every other remake is different than the original. And one believing that the casting means that it will be culturally or historically irrelevant, which is at least a topical criticism, as most of the Disney remakes as of late have leaned into the accuracy of the cultures from which the stories originated. I went back and watched The Little Mermaid from 1989 to see what exactly everyone was so emotional about, and I realized that they may have a point in some regards, but not so much if the criticism is about the historical or cultural accuracy of the live-action adaptation of The Little Mermaid. Because upon my research, I realized that the choice to make The Little Mermaid black may have been a move to make the movie a little more historically and culturally accurate. It may be the most culturally accurate version of the story yet. If you're looking for the next Little Mermaid adaptation to be a reflection of Danish culture and history, the ethnicity of its creator Hans Christian Andersen in 1837, the choice to make Ariel a black girl may be a step in the right direction. You can find evidence right there in the 1989 Little Mermaid, because firstly, The Little Mermaid is a hodgepodge of culture. The story begins with a swashbuckling song on Prince Eric's ship. We can already see a problem with the attire of the sailors because their outfits don't necessarily reflect that of Danish culture. Most of the sailors on Prince Eric's ship throughout the film are wearing a mariner sailor shirt that were introduced into the French Navy in the 1850s, which means that we may be able to place this film post-1850. The seamen otherwise have the general appearance and speech of the English. Eric's manservant Grimsby's garb is far closer to that of a 19th century Danish sailor given his jacket, but it is probably more distinctly English. I mean, Grimsby does have a very strong English accent.
Oh, of course I had hoped it would be a wedding.
At the bottom of the sea, the general appearance of Atlantica is reminiscent of old European-style architecture, albeit with a distinctly underwater motif. Still, everything else about the merpeople and royalty is distinctly European. From the general hierarchical structure of the mermaid monarchy to the music sang and played for and by Ariel's royal family, being classical music. Now, this music isn't particularly Danish as far as the instrumentation is concerned, but much of Danish music at the time was classical. So a point for Danish culture here. But generally speaking, it was European. There were two other times when music appeared in the movie as representative of culture, and that is in the show tunes. Ariel and Ursula's songs are quite distinctly Broadway and very show tuney. This movie being the originator of the Disney show tune style of musicality. Look, here comes another I Want song. Not that it's bad, it's just expected. Part of Your World and Poor Unfortunate Souls are very traditionally Broadway, which would make them culturally American in origin. However, the other two show tunes are Under the Sea and Kiss the Girl. Both of these songs are distinctly Caribbean in origin, from the musical instruments used to the phrasing of the singing to the composition and musical styling. These songs were sung by Sebastian the Crab and other non-humanoid sea creatures. In fact, the majority of the sea life and other animals in the film singing with Sebastian seem to be ethnically Caribbean, just like Sebastian is. The songs had very strong Afro-Caribbean coloring to them. Very blatantly so, even. As we continue the movie, we do see glimpses of culture again through the architecture of Prince Eric's homeland. The buildings, his seaside castle, the village beset with palm trees. We see here what is probably the most Danish aspect of the film, the buildings. Now, this isn't to say that these buildings couldn't come from a different culture. There's even a rumor that his castle was inspired by a seaside castle in Sweden. And the same could be said of Eric's ship. It isn't particularly Danish. It could be, but even for its use of a mermaid figurehead on the ship, its origins are Greek, not Danish. Although this isn't to say that 19th century Danes didn't have them. And of course, we cannot forget about the French chef. There's really not much I can say about him. They put a French chef in the film and named him Louis. For comedy's sake. It's fun. So, The Little Mermaid had a little bit of French culture, European culture, English culture, Greek culture, Caribbean culture, American culture, Swedish, and a little bit of Danish culture. If you really want to make the live-action Little Mermaid remake to be more culturally or historically Danish, it couldn't be that difficult, considering how un-Danish and culturally eclectic the original film was. That said, what exactly about the choice to make the next Little Mermaid film star a black girl as Ariel would indicate that the filmmakers are taking a step in the right direction of being more culturally or historically accurate? Well, you'd first have to ask yourself the question, what about Denmark has anything to do with black people, particularly 19th century black people around the time The Little Mermaid was written? Well, the answer to this is the same answer to most modern questions. Slavery. 19th century Europe was at the time at the latter end of slavery and colonialism. Many European nations had decided that the enslavement of African peoples was far too cruel and evil to continue. However, by 1837, the time that The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen was written, Denmark still had a hold on colonized islands in the Caribbean. It wasn't until a decade later, in 1848, that Denmark, like most of the colonized Caribbean, abolished slavery. So this Black Little Mermaid could very well be the cultural representation of a colonized Danish Caribbean. It could be the much needed course correct for depicting a story about white mermaids that clearly took place in the Caribbean, given the seaside castle beset with palm trees, the native flamingo species, and yes, the appropriated Caribbean music. Caribbean music, might I add, that was never sung by the angelic humans or the humanoid mermaid species, who were exclusively presented as white and who were sonically classically European, but by lesser sea creatures and land creatures like Sebastian the Crab and the Blackfish. Lesser creatures that were only depicted as subservient to the white merpeople. This new black Ariel could be the descendant of African slaves stolen from their land that jumped from ships in the Middle Passage, not to drown, but to be transformed by the sea into mermaids. Mermaids that from then on could live freely. Maybe the fear that King Triton has of humans post-Danish colonial slavery will be the fear of the colonizers who enslaved the mermaids' grandparents. This may not be the cultural or historical accuracy that everyone wants to see from the Little Mermaid remake, but it could be the historical accuracy that we deserve, that we need. Danish colonialism is Danish history. Danish history is Black history, whether you like it or not. So, this Black Little Mermaid. may be the most historically accurate version of the film yet. Maybe it was the love of a black Ariel and a white Eric that helped heal the hurt of slavery in the Caribbean. Maybe that was the intention of this story when Anderson published it. Sounds beautiful to me. Unless Disney's intention was just to go with colorblind casting for its own sake, big ups to 1997's Cinderella for starting the trend. But to think Disney would ignore the centuries-long history of the Danish and their influence on the Caribbean, especially after taking such cultural care with other live-action Disney adaptations. On the contrary, I think Disney is too thoughtful for that.